Well, let's see where to begin. I I use a bunch of different apps for different purposes when it comes to drawing, but for drawing specifically for illustrations that go into presentations, I almost always use Sketches Pro for all that. This app, um, it doesn't have all the bells and features of some of the other drawing apps that are out there, but it's got um, I think some simplicity is a design feature, and it has ways of organizing things, but it also has a set of tools that are just perfect for doing simple illustrations. And I believe when you're giving a presentation, any illustrations that you have ought to be, it's kind of like do the most simple thing that works. Like in coding, you know, do the thing that solves the problem, and don't gold plate it or get too fancy with it. And so, but the things I'm going to be showing you, um, there are equivalent features in almost every drawing app I've ever seen. So it should be pretty easy to translate what I'm going to show you to other drawing apps. And I guess to start off, I'll give you a brief tour of this application. On the left-hand side are all your tools. So you got up at the top, that first thing is a sketch pencil. There's different tips for each of these things. So you can have like a fine tip, a bigger tip. So this is all pencil stuff. And then there's a technical pen. There's a marker with different marker tips. There's an ink pen. These are kind of like Coptic ink. It's kind of similar to what apparently real artists use in the real world. And then there's other paintbrushes. There's an airbrush type thing. There's a quill tip, and then there's things like this guy right here that has different fill patterns. It's got some text features. It's got some shapes. There's an eraser. There's a smudge tool. There's this cut tool that where you can lasso around something and cut it and move it around. And then there's a ruler. The ruler's pretty cool. For the illustrations that I do for my presentations, almost like 95% of the work I do is this ink pen, the fill tool, and occasionally an eraser, occasionally a ruler if I need it. But for the most part, I'm going to use one of these guys, and you can change tips. And the reason I like Sketches Pro, one of the reasons I like Sketches Pro is because this particular ink pen has some cool features where I can, on the right hand side here, I've got all my colors. I'll do a black. And the nice thing about this ink pen is if I draw slow and steady, it creates a consistent fat line. But if I draw faster, then it tapers off depending on the velocity. So I can make it fat at one end, skinny in the middle, and fat at the other end. And the nice thing about that is that it just adds character to the stuff that I'm drawing. Like if I want to draw a square, it's got, depending on how fast I draw it, it's got a little bit of cartoonish weight to the lines. And so they're thicker, in places and thinner in places, depending on how fast I draw it. And it just makes it more visually interesting. And that's one of the reasons why I really like this app. Using digital tools is really cool because you don't have to just go back and erase everything by hand. You can just swipe with a couple of fingers and undo stuff. So this is like, I do this all the time where I try to draw something that's like, well, I don't like that. So I'll swipe and undo it and then try to draw it again. And I do that over and over again until it looks the way that I want it to, instead of, you know, if I was drawing this on paper, I'd be drawing and messing up and, you know, making a big mess, right? The other thing that we'll get into, the other feature that this app has is layers. And layers, that what I'm tapping on is this icon in the very top right corner. This is one of the most powerful features that you will find in any of the drawing apps that you use. Layers are an extremely powerful way to compose a drawing, so that you can draw something on one layer, you can switch to another layer, start to draw something, and if you mess up, you know, you're not messing up the entire illustration, you're only messing up on that one layer. Or you can draw an outline on one layer and add colors and shading and stuff on a separate layer, and you can just, you know, it makes it so much easier down the road to keep things separated on layers. And there's powerful things you can do with layers besides that. All right. So my approach to drawing illustrations, and please, anybody, if you have questions at any time, you know, speak up. Any questions about any of the stuff I've covered so far in the app, or how it might compare to the app that you might?
None from me. Thank you.
Cool. All right. So there's several approaches to drawing. The traditional approach is that you would create a sketch first, you know, kind of like how to draw an owl. You know, you draw this, you draw the sketch of what the general shape of the owl, and then you draw the rest of the owl, right? So that approach is that you would take something like a sketch pencil, and let's say we want to draw a jar of peanut butter. I like peanut butter. You know, not as much as bacon, but peanut butter and bacon go together pretty well. So in my mind, I might think, well, what does a jar of peanut butter look like? And I'll think, well, there's the lid, and there's like an oval shape, you know, at the top of the lid, and then the lid has some lines here. It's got a bottom curve, and then the bottle itself, it kind of starts, it flanges out from the bottom of the lid and comes down on both sides, and then it's got a little bit of a, you know, bottom to it. And I'll, you know, when you're sketching, it doesn't matter if you're making mistakes or anything. You're just trying to come up with the general shape, and as you add more and more to it, you know, you kind of darken up the places that are right. And so you sketch this whole thing out, and then, you know, there's like a label on here, and we'll call it GIF, because that makes everybody happy. And then, you know, once you have your outline of what it is that you want, then I can go to my layers, and I can add a new layer on top, and then use my ink pen over here to then draw on top of my sketch. So I'm using my sketch as a way to trace my jar of peanut butter. That's terrible. And really poorly drawn peanut there. And so that's the traditional approach. And now I can go in here and I can add maybe another layer and put that new layer underneath the jar, and I can use that as my basis for drawing. So maybe we'll say that this peanut butter has a red lid, and I'll just, one approach is, the cool thing about layers is I can draw, all over the place, outside the lines and so forth, and I'm not going to mess up the outline of the jar that's above it. So I'm drawing, in this case, I'm drawing underneath that upper layer, and then I can go back with an eraser and clean up around without. And again, I'm being real sloppy. I'm drawing all over that black outline, but I'm not, harming that because it's on a separate layer. That's one way to do it, and that can take a lot of time if you're filling in big blocks of color. So the nice thing is when you have a tool like this fill tool is in this app, I can draw, I don't know if you can see the dotted outline, but as I'm drawing around, it gives me this dotted outline of stuff. And when I let go, it fills in that space. And so I can draw, you can't see the dotted outline because it's behind the thing, but I can draw the shape of that lid, and it's drawing that red color on the layer underneath the lid. And then I can do the same for, like, let's say the label is blue. Just kind of roughly draw that. And, I don't have to be real accurate, because then I can go back with my pen and fill in any of the spaces. And then let's take a brown color of some kind and fill in the other part of the jar. So we've got our feces colored peanut butter. All right, so that kind of, is really good enough. Using layers and using the different colors, using the, sketching it and doing the outlines, you can do just about everything you probably need to do for a simple illustration to be used in a slide. And you can do things like, I'm gonna add, like the hard way that I used to do this all the time is I would take that brown color and I would blend it with maybe black and come up with a darker shade of brown, and then come back and add that brown shade, or that darker brown, on one side to make it look like, it had some dimension to it, like there's a light coming in from the left, and so it's darker on the right hand side because there's a little bit of shadow, and that gives it a three-dimensional look. But that's the hard way of doing it, because you're having to do that for every single color that you're using. The easier way to do this is most apps that have layers also support some type of layer behavior. And so the layers that we've created so far are all just solid colors. Whatever you draw on top is going to have precedence with whatever's below it. But in Sketches Pro, you've got, when you click on the gear icon, you get these layer options, and there's opaque, which is what we've been using, and then there's darken and brighten and opacity and so forth. And so the really cool way of adding shadows in 3 dimensions to drawing is to use the darken mode. In some apps, it calls it multiply mode. So I'll turn on darken for this top layer. And you see it's now got a different icon in the bottom right hand corner of that layer. So it's that multiply mode. And now I can take a shade like gray, like this first shade of gray. I'll use my fill tool, or I could use a pen, and I'll just use a pen. I'll take that, and then I'll draw. I'm on the wrong layer. Got to select that layer. And now when I draw gray, see, like if I draw gray over here, it's gray. But if I draw it on top of any color over here, it's multiplying that gray with the red underneath, or the brown, whoops, or the brown that's underneath, or even the blue. And it's creating a darker shade of that color. So now I can fill all this in, maybe add a little bit to the top there too. And now I've got a more three-dimensional looking jar of peanut butter. Maybe I'll take my brown and fill in the peanut here. And now I can, when I'm done, is I can turn off that bottom layer, the sketch layer, and now I've got my clean illustration that I can export and put into my slides, or to put into a README file, or wherever I'm going to be using this illustration for documentation or something. Any questions about any of this?
No, thank you. Pretty good summary there.
Yeah, so that, I mean, that is pretty much,
no,
yeah, it's just
I've never watched anybody really kind of sketch stuff and use the layers, and I know like Adobe and all that has had all that stuff, but like sitting here watching you use it, it's just been like, it's one of those things that's like so simple that I've never even thought about, like, you know, the amount of things I've screwed up over the years just trying to do something.
Yeah.
And it's just the time savings there with that shading.
Yeah, these are all things I wish someone had shown me. Because I never took the time to go and like watch YouTube videos of anybody else to see what they were doing. So all these things that I'm showing you are things that I've learned on my own the hard way. And once I figured out how I could decompose images in this way, it made things so much easier. So much like used to, it would take me a ridiculous amount of time to create one slide for a talk. And now the creating the slides is the fun and fast part, because I can create an outline for the talk I'm going to give. I can create blank slides for each of the kind of main points that I want to make in my presentation, and put in the notes, what kind of illustration I want to go in there, and then I can quickly go through and build out the slides that I want to create and put in the presentation using this kind of stuff. So what I'm going to show you now is like taking this to the next level. So sketching and then tracing on top of your sketch is kind of the traditional way, but what I do a lot of times is like I need a reference, right? I need to be able to, I can't remember exactly what a jar of peanut butter looks like, or whatever this thing is that I want to draw looks like. So I'm going to start a new drawing and show you a couple of other things. So this app, and just about any other app, has some type of import capability. Almost every app does. And I can import using my camera or a photo or something else. And what I'll do is, let's see, I will go to our friend Google, and let's pick something. You tell me what is something, Kyle, you've got a talk coming up. What's something that you think you might want to draw in your talk?
I think Brandon's the one with the talk. I don't have any talks lined up.
Oh, Brandon.
One of the opening ones is going to be two people sitting at a table. It doesn't sound very easy to find and draw. But.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is going to be harder.
Let's pick something simpler.
Yeah, let's pick something simpler to start with.
How about one person sitting at a table?
Let's start with an object.
Okay, perfect. How about a table?
A table. Let's start with a table. So I'll search Google for a table. I'll look at some images, and I'll think, what's the kind of table that I'm looking for?
That top center one looks beautiful.
Yeah, like that one.
Yeah, it looks great.
All right. So I'll save this image, and then I'll go over to Sketches Pro, and I'll choose photo, and I'll get. I'll take. So I can now do one of two things. I can either stick this in the corner and use that as a reference so that I can look at it while I'm drawing, or I can stick it in the center of my drawing and enlarge it, place it there, and then on my layers, I'll change the opacity of this image and then add a new layer on top. I'll take my, and you might do this a number of different ways, but I usually just like to create a black outline of the objects. And that's usually most of my illustrations are black and white, and that's on purpose because I want the highest contrast, the highest visibility. That helps me to keep things simple. What's the simplest thing I could draw that's going to, give you the right idea that object is what it is. So, I know we got an edge here, got an edge here. And again, I don't really care how sloppy it might be, because craptastic drawings are still fascinating. And that's what I try to tell people, is that it doesn't matter if you don't think you can draw. People will see your drawings and go, wow, I'll give him A for effort.
Well, I think they add, I don't know if it's a bit of personality or flavor to it too, when it's not like symmetrical lines and everything. Like when I look at a lot of your drawings that you've done in your presentations and such, I mean, it adds to it, I guess. If that's
absolutely. It's visually interesting. I went to a session one time a couple of years ago. Arthur Doler gave this talk on how our brains learn, and the thing that like really stuck in my mind was that he says our brains love to be surprised, and I think that is so true when it comes to illustration. Is that when you look at an illustration that's hand drawn, it's different. It's something you've never seen before. It's unique, and it's like a visual feast, right? You can look at it and say, well, you can study it and figure out what it is. It's interesting to look at. So even terribly drawn stick figures are fun to look at because they're different. There's something you've never seen before. And that's what I try to remind people. So I've created a layer underneath the table. I hid the original image. Now I'm going to use my fill tool to quickly draw that brown color underneath. And sometimes I'm drawing the color here, but a lot of times in my talks, I don't even use color. I just, like I said before, I use black and white, and that's it. But I'm just demonstrating that you can use color to add more to your photos. And then I'll add another layer, set that layer to darken, take a gray, and then use the fill tool again to darken up parts of the table. The stuff that's underneath. and that just adds more dimension. The cool thing about this fill tool is that it also supports a darken mode. So in the bottom right hand corner of this panel that comes out, you see there's a thing that I can toggle darken and opaque. So when darken mode is turned on with this fill tool, if I continue to draw over the top, it multiplies those fills together. So like if I continue to draw a gray circle here in the middle, it's going to get darker and darker and darker, right? So I can use that same technique to take that back leg, and I can, as many times as I want to, draw over the top of it, it's going to get darker and darker. So another time-saving technique. That's it in a nutshell. Is like, that's my secret sauce. You know, that's how I do a lot of the illustrations that I do, and how I do them so quickly is that I will think of something that I want to draw. I know I'm no master at drawing it. I've never drawn that before, but I'm confident that I can go find a photo that looks kind of like the thing that I want to draw, and I'll import that in, and I'll either trace over it or I'll stick it in the corner and use that as my reference to draw something that looks, you know, close enough to what I want it to look like. And that's the secret, y'all. It's no there's no shame in, you know, taking a photo and tracing over it. That's really what artists do all the time, is that you take, either you're tracing over something that you sketched yourself, or you're tracing over a you know, a photo or some other reference.
Okay. Thank you so much, David.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that's awesome, David. I appreciate it. Although I don't have to talk, it's good knowledge to have if I ever get to drawing some stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can use illustrations for so many things, not just giving talks, but
yeah,
all types of communications and stuff to make it a lot more interesting. Any questions?
Kyle, you got any?
Not really. This was perfect. It was good to just see it, like watch it unfold.
Yeah.
You want to show off your photo?
So I'll show you what else I do. One other thing I just thought of is I'll add some layers somewhere above or beneath the drawing. If I'm going to do a word or put some kind of title on the screen, then I'll use this ink pen, the same one that I've been using. And I've had to teach myself how to draw better letters, right? So when I first started drawing illustrations for slides, my handwriting was pretty bad, and I had to figure out, like, man, I can't draw a letter that way. It doesn't work right when I try to draw it on a tablet or something. And so I've had to kind of relearn a little bit of about handwriting, and it just comes with practice. But what I'll do is I'll take the ink pen, and let's say we're just gonna call this table. Maybe stick y'all down here. And I think, well, that kind of works, but I'm going to use my cut tool, and I'm going to draw around my word. And again, because I'm on a separate layer, I can be real sloppy. I can include part of the table, and it's not going to, you know, actually damage the rest of the illustration. So I can draw around it, and then I can take and move it around, so I can center it above the table, or I can pinch to make it bigger or smaller. And do the same thing with the y'all. I can stick it over here. And that's how I can you know, if I'm going to put a word or a sentence or a phrase or something on an illustration, I can draw it anywhere that I want to, and then use the cut tool to manipulate it, move it around, and put it where it needs to be. So if you feel like are looking at something I've posted on Twitter and it's got words on it, like a quote that I've done for somebody, that's usually because I've drawn out that quote using the entire screen, and then I've used the cutting tool to cut it into individual phrases and center them on the left or the right side or something like that, to make it look like I want to. So that's pretty much 99% of all my techniques for creating illustrations.